Welcome back. I'm another episode. I'm sitting down with my uncle, and today we're talking about, I believe, Omniplan, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so what was Omniplan? How did what exactly were they?
From 1981 until 1993, Omniplan was a prime contractor and then a subcontractor to NASA at Johnson Space Center.
And so how did you get involved in this case?
Well, Jonathan, I was stationed at Kennedy Space Center. I was doing some good cases out there. I asked for a transfer to Johnson Space Center so I could start law school. It was granted. I was a senior special agent, and we were expected to develop our own cases. So I walked into my office, not expecting to find any cases, and I found one hotline complaint. And essentially, what it said was the president of Omniplan is using the credit cards to steal money. Didn't identify who the president was. Didn't have anything other than that.
Was this
But
a random hotline complaint?
yeah, we get them all the time. It was a OIG hotline complaint. We take them seriously, but really, a complaint like that would be more in line with a junior agent. But it offered me an opportunity. I took that complaint. I said ciao to the folks in the office. I went over to the Defense Contract Audit Agency, DCAA, and I asked to speak to the manager. And then he assembled all the auditors. I spoke to them. And if I could digress for a second, DCA is very important to NASA OIG investigators because our own OIG investigators don't really assist us with investigations. We use the DCA auditors. And so this was my way of introducing myself to DCA in hopes that we could develop cases in the future. So having a calm conversation with everybody, just telling them a little bit about my background and what I'm trying to accomplish. And I
Kind of
pull
a
out the
meet and greet.
Omniplan. Excuse me.
It's kind of like a meet and greet. It was something small, simple, so you could
Yeah,
introduce yourself.
it was. Hey, I like you. You like me. When you find a case, come to me and we'll work it.
You were networking.
Networking. You got it. So the bottom line was, I go ahead and I pull out the hotline complaint, and did not expect anybody to know anything about Omniplan. But I said, I got this company called Omniplan. And as soon as I mentioned the name, auditors were literally jumping out of their seats. The owner of Omniplan, really the guy that ran it, wasn't his wife, GP, who's the president. It was the chief executive officer, Ralph Elias Montillo. And he was known as a total type A personality. So when the auditors would come over to try to get information about Omniplan, he would say, get out of here, basically. And they suspected that Omniplan actually owned the buildings they were in and claiming to be leasing from other companies, but they could never prove it. And so I said, well, thank you very much. I'm going to network with other folks. And I went over to grab my little Omniplan hotline complaint with the knowledge that was given. I went over to the Small Business Administration and I said, hey, look, Omniplan is the largest minority owned, woman owned business working for NASA. Do you happen to have any records on it? And sure enough, they did. They provided it to me. And what did they provide? They provided me their paperwork to support the purchase of the building 17041 El Camino Real in Clear Lake. And sure enough, the owners of that building were Ralph and GP Montillo. But they claimed to be leasing that building from Mercury Trust. Mercury Trust told them to pound sand when they asked for information. And Ralph Montillo's position was, I have no interest in Mercury Trust. And yet the owner of the building was Montillo. So day one, I'm kicking back. I'm going like, well, that's kind of cool. I've got a provable fraud case. Now let's see how big a deal it is. So I went back to DCA and I said, I need two of your auditors to support me. I was given Ronald Martin and uh, Donald Ward. Oh God, he'd kill me if I forgot his name. Donald Ward and Ronald Marta. Now, Ronald Marta was a Fulbright scholar, a genius, really sharp guy. They all were. They were very good. And so I said, okay, you're going to work for me. We're going to start building this case up. And then I called Small Business Administration, OIG, and I said, hey, look, it looks like you're tied into this thing, and I want one of your agents to come into this as well. And I got two. I got an agent and an auditor. And as I'm starting to look at this thing, we're starting to send subpoenas, and God knows how many subpoenas that we sent out, but scores of subpoenas. As I'm starting to send subpoenas out and get documents back, it's clear to me that it's a much bigger problem. And I realized that they have three shell companies that they're using: Mercury Trust, Space Industries Leasing, and Space Industries Properties. Three companies that are allegedly not owned by Montijo. He has no connection with it. Two of them were at mailboxes, et cetera, and one was a located address at a post office box. The only problem with Montijo, because he was a type A personality, even though he was putting the names of the company and other people, Nancy Montgomery and Joyce Martin, he kept his name on the mailbox addresses so he could reclaim mail. And he created bank accounts for each one of these companies. And because he didn't trust anybody, not only were those individuals' names on the bank accounts, but so too was his own.
So he
And
was
that
tying
way,
himself to everything.
he was tying himself to everything, and yet he was saying, I don't have any connection with this company. I don't know anything about them. I'm just leasing from them. And what we found out that Montijo was leasing his three Houston buildings from either Space Industries Properties or Mercury Trust, his equipment, phones, everything you could think of, and vehicles from Space Industries Leasing. And then the way the fraud works, if I could get into that real quick,
Of course, yeah.
the way the fraud worked was NASA has what they call cost plus award fee contracts. Very important to understand that. And what that means is that NASA will reimburse for legitimate ownership costs associated with contract or the higher lease costs. And so what Montijo was doing, he didn't want those nickels and dimes. He wanted those dollars. So by leasing everything to himself, he inflated the costs, and he sent them up to Rockwell Space Operations Company, who turned around and sent them to NASA. Now, when he's making those false claims, you got the false claims, that's a crime. You got either mail fraud or wire fraud, two different types of crimes. You got a false statement to the government. And they're all wrapped up in this nice submission. Then when the money comes back down to Rockwell and then to Omniplan, what do you have? You have embezzlement of funds. And then it gets to Omniplan. And what does Ralph Montijo do with all those lease costs? He sends them down to Mercury Trust, Space Industries Leasing, and Space Industries Properties. And immediately they send them out to his private bank accounts. He had 36 of them. So the
36 bank accounts?
36 bank accounts. And so the bottom line was that we followed the money all the way down. And when that money goes from Omniplan, say Mercury Trust, to some other place that's associated with the fraud, that is money laundering. And he had scores of money laundering counts. So Again, what we did was we worked diligently from 1992 to 1995 putting together this case. And then in 1995, previously we had indicted Ralph Matteo on 270 counts. We could have indicted him on thousands of counts because remember what I told you about the submissions? It happened twice a month. So every time you submitted that, all those different crimes came into place, and he had been doing it since 1981.
And this was what year?
Since 1981. So
Yes, yes,
from
no, no.
1980,
I was asking what year you were investigating this.
oh, I 1992 is when I came in. So 11 years after he started doing it, I got involved. And one day
Wow.
into my case, I proved it up. So the bottom line was that we kept going from there. And there are a lot of side stories on this. And if I could tell you a few of the side stories.
Yeah, I would love to hear.
Okay, so uh, Omniplan's principal business location in Houston was 17041 El Camino Real. It was a two-story building. On the second story, part of the building was sealed off. The entire building was charged off to NASA. And what Montiel was doing was he was storing pizzas and candy for his side businesses. Papa Primos of Houston, Papa Primos of Arizona, Papa Primos of Texas, in that location, as well as Cost Plus. And so the bottom line was, but he didn't want any of his employees to know about that because, again, he was charging that space off to NASA. So they had a code system, his staff, that when the pizzas or candy or anything else came in, they used a code to say that these delivery guys were bringing it in, and they kind of bring it in, sneak it in, put it away. Now, the poor guys that lived on this, that worked on the second story, were just flatly out of luck because what happened was that Montiel needed to keep his pizzas and candy cool. And I've talked to many people about his pizzas, the worst pizzas on the planet. He would deliver them like to pools and bowling alleys. And the bottom line was, what did that mean? If the air conditioner is going into these the compartments for the areas, spaces for the pizzas and the candy and other supplies, the employees were losing out on air conditioning. And this is Texas. It gets hot in the summer. But he wasn't telling anybody about that. One of his employees complained to him. He said, Mr. Montiel, I'm being charged, I'm charging my costs off to NASA, but I'm really not doing anything for NASA. And so he's sitting at a desk, chair, and the whole 9 yards. He conveyed that information to Montiel. Next day he comes to work. His desk is gone, his chair is gone, everything's gone. Bottom line, you complain, that's what you got. So I don't know. I guess he was standing around for a while. But the bottom line was Montiel was really an interesting guy.
He seems kind of foolish though that he put his name on everything.
Well,
Like,
let me tell you about the search warrant. This is great, and I got to lead into the search warrant.
okay.
We developed an informant, and I was with the FBI guy. And by the way, I don't know if I went into yet the FBI wanting it on the case.
No, you haven't. So
Okay, like many agents, I don't care for the FBI. They're not great team players, and so I had no interest when the FBI came knocking and said they wanted it on the Omniplan case. I told them to pound sand. I wasn't interested. They went up to the Inspector General in D.C. and said they wanted in on the case. And so I'm having this big meeting had 25 people on the task force. And the FBI shows up, and I heard immediately before that the OIG said that they could be part of this.
What
And
jurisdiction would they have on this?
oh, they got concurrent jurisdiction. Fraud is fraud.
Oh, okay.
It directly impacts my agency, so NASA has jurisdiction, but they also have jurisdiction.
Oh, okay.
And so the bottom line was, guy comes to the door, and I won't mention his name, but a great guy, and he says, "Hey, I want in on this, and I understand that your OIG said that it was okay." And I said, "Look, OIG calls shots here. She says you're in, you're in. But the first time you don't participate as a team player, you're out. She can tell you that you're in. I can fire you out of my task force." And so he came in, and he was great. And the financial analysts that he brought in with him, FBI financial analysts, awesome. Never had a problem with them. They were great. So the bottom line is, one night, the FBI agent, probably about 10 o'clock at night, the FBI agent and myself were driving around in the car, and at the office complex for Omniplan. And we see a guy that we're interested in, and he's taking off real late at night. And so we decide to follow him. And so he takes off, and he's going like 1,000,000 miles an hour through these small streets. The FBI guy has his lights off, and it was, like the shadow just moving right after him. It was really cool. We get him, we flip him, he becomes an informant. And the bottom line was, in 1973, in April of 1973, or 1993, April of 1993, he says, they're destroying the documents that you're trying to get under subpoena, about the leases and so forth. So I get a probable cause affidavit to do a search warrant, and we get 4 search warrants, one for each of his office buildings and one for his home. And the next day, we bring in an army of agents. The FBI alone had 40 agents, and computer operatives and so forth. And I had an operational plan for executing the search warrant. I gave that, and then we deployed agents to each location to be an overwatch. And we're in Building 265 at Johnson Space Center. It's a skiff. And then we notified security to basically open up the gates and let our convoys go. And so then we fly out of Johnson Space Center. About 3 or 4 minutes before we arrive, we call up, and the cops tell them that we're going to be there. The reason why we didn't tell them before that is there were like 500 employees at Omniplan, and chances were that was going to be a cop that was related to somebody there.
Yeah.
And so they helped with the umbrella to make sure that nobody bothered us when we were around. And so we went into each building. We had NASA photographers snapping pictures of everything. And the most interesting thing I'd ever seen in my life occurred there. We went to Ralph Mattio's office, and on his desk, he had different stacks of documents, about this high. They were lease and quitclaim deeds. They were different stages of being cut and paste. He was cutting his name out. He was putting his sister's name with a different last name in. The only thing, she didn't know anything about it. He took her name off of a love letter, basically, that she sent him, and cut it out, and professionally, remember graphic arts designs, they were professionally inserting this and then copying the documents after that. And these were the documents that they were going to provide to the OIG. And so the bottom line is, we caught him flat in the act. Unbelievable. You talk about a smoking gun. This was a smoking cannon. So bottom line is, right as I'm admiring our cash, knock, knock, knock. Ralph Macchio's attorney, who's a famous attorney, is knocking at the door. And I know the guy, I'm not going to mention his name, but a good guy, good attorney. He said, Joe, we want to get some of Macchio's stuff off of his desk. And I assumed that he did not know what was going on. Montillo probably just sent him down there to get the documents. And so I said, I'm sure you'd like to get those off of his desk, but the problem is I've got them now. And then it was all the writing was on the wall, and we were just building. My auditors still had to put together the packets with all the evidence that we were securing, and so we had 8 auditors working 8 hours a day for 2 years, putting together packets of documents. And had we wanted to, we could have had thousands and thousands of counts. But we had the first time we indicted him on, I think it was, I want to say 13 counts or something like that. But we had to capture all of his money. So we came back in and we did it for 270 counts. Remember, when you do a count, you got to prove it up in court. And you don't want to go crazy on this thing. If you had a point, prove up 1,000 counts, give the rest, you can give the rest of your life up because you're not going to have any time. So, but 270 was a lot. It was the largest count indictment ever in the history of NASA. And we went and we packeted those things together and we did it. But he finally pled out to 179 felonies and 1 forfeiture count. But and agreed to pay $15 million. But the bottom line is that we also indicted all of his companies. So we indicted Omniplan, we indicted OmniPoint, Mercury Trust, Papa Primos of Arizona, Papa Primos of Texas, and then the other 2 companies, Space Industries Leasing and Space Industries Properties, like the first 5, all were liquidated. So 7 of his companies were court ordered liquidated as a result of this investigation, 5 after being convicted of felonies. We also convicted one of his vice presidents, his bookkeeper, his administrative assistant, and another individual that was associated with him. And so in total, we had 5 companies that were convicted, 5 individuals that were convicted, 7 companies that were liquidated. Now, when we're doing this, right, there were a lot of other things that were happening. For example, when we did the search warrant, first thing you do when you do a search warrant, you tell everybody, get away from the computers. Leave them as they are. Don't touch them. Back away. And so then we put the FBI computer specialists on each computer, and they're starting to download and go through the documents. And all of a sudden, we see that there's this mass exchange of documentation going on the computers. What happened was a core of Omniplan employees went to another building, a Rockwell building, and started downloading information from the computers. It was it caught everybody's attention.
That's massive, though. So a case like that doesn't happen a lot, right? With that many moving parts and
It was there were a lot of firsts with this case. It was really the first lease pack scheme that we went after, and then we went after more after that. It was apparently the first Title 18, 15, 16 conviction in the history of the United States. That was obstruction of government audit. And so, there were a lot of different parts. We did not go after GP Montillo, the wife, for compassionate reasons. His son that we were going after died before we went to court, but there were a lot of moving parts on that case.
you
Now
said
the
he
interesting thing,
go ahead.
go ahead.
Well, you said he paid like he had to pay a massive fine and liquidate all those companies, but did he do time as well, or
He did 2 years in prison, 3 years probation, and there's a reason why he got away with such a light sentence. After he pled, he agreed to work for me. So basically, he would come to building 265, the skiff, and he would assist us in building other cases. So um, it was for valuable service provided that he got away. He faced, I think, the judge on the case said that he faced 880 years in prison. So the deal that he got was pretty good.
that's insane.
But here's how we got to the next task force. One of the leaders of Omniplan I brought into the skiff.
Well, so you're going on to another. Before you do that, this whole
Oh
time you were also in law school?
yeah, yeah. For 6 months, I was alone in an apartment, and then my wife came and we bought a house. But uh, day for day, when I was running the Omniplan Task Force investigations, I was going to law school. I would literally wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning, run, start my investigations, go until maybe five if I was lucky, get off, go to law school, stay in law school till about 9:30 or 10, then go to the law library and be there until 1 or 2 in the morning. Then go back to the house, try to fall asleep, and get up the next day at 5. Uh, as you know, I have 6 sons, and they were all young at the time. And so the weekends I tried to devote for them, but it never worked. But I would go to their games, their baseball games, their soccer games, and so forth, and try to be as good an absentee father as I was. But everybody supported what I was doing. My wife was behind it, so that was great. And
Crazy schedule. I don't know how you
yeah,
maintain that.
excuse me.
I don't know how you maintain that, like without
Well,
just collapsing.
yeah, the inspector general of NASA OIG said the same thing. She was a lawyer, and she said, "I just don't know how you did it, Joe." And I'm going like, well, when I get my claws in a case, I don't want to let up. And so there was a lot of enthusiasm. Each day we were learning something new, and it was kind of a nifty thing.
Did your grades
One,
suffer? Like,
well, yeah, let me give you another story if I could.
okay,
We,
yeah.
Ronald Marta and I. One of the things that was interesting, as I told you, Ronald Marta was my right hand man. He was second in charge of the task force. Initially, there was a lot of agents that were upset about that. But as soon as I got to see why I put him as second in charge, there was no controversy. He was brilliant, and so every once in a while I would bring Ronald Marta into an interview that I would do, and so we get this big guy that we had evidence on, and we bring him down to the skiff, and Marta's sitting there with me, and we're trying to prove up the fact that he knew and was knowingly passing along fraudulent documents to Rockwell. And he said something to the effect, yeah, I knew they were fraudulent. I was sending them forward. And he was so matter of fact about it that we were just flat out surprised. And Marta kind of comes at him and starts asking some real tough questions. I'm kind of sitting back looking because auditors are not known for being aggressive, agents are. And so I'm going like, wow. He said, well, let me tell you why I had no culpability here and why my hands are clean. And I'm going like, you knowingly passed on fraudulent documents to Rockwell and your hands are clean. He said, absolutely. I said, okay, explain. And he said, here's the deal. I went over to Rockwell and I reported the crimes that Omniplan was engaging in to them. I let them know. They knew that every voucher that was coming in was fraudulent. As soon as I knew, they knew. And then we had another problem. If Rockwell was receiving knowingly fraudulent vouchers and then submitting them to NASA, they were just as guilty, in my opinion, as Omniplan. And we started to, well, as we started to transition from Omniplan, we started to look at Rockwell. And sure enough, not only were they doing that, but even after they fired Omniplan for fraud, after we executed the search warrant, the next day Omniplan was fired. They were still giving them these exceptional award uh, uh, ratings, which NASA would take and would give a bonus essentially to both Rockwell and Omniplan for. So they were directly benefiting by saying that Omniplan's is super duper company, and they weren't. And so that set the stage for moving on to our next leg of this case, and that was Rockwell.
Before you continue, though, how did they justify giving an award to a company they had already fired?
That's what my question was. Uh, and that's why there was a civil lawsuit against the successors of Rockwell Space Operations Company, which were Boeing and United Space Alliance, because they're responsible for the wrongful payments and so forth of Rockwell. And so the bottom line was that was our thing. And in 2000, they settled the lawsuit and they paid. We won. So the bottom line is, that was pretty nifty stuff. But even at that time, at the same time that we were looking at Omniplan, I put out this inquiry to other companies to see if there were any other individuals that were engaging in leaseback schemes. And an informant from Lockheed Martin came forward to the Justice Department, and they said, yeah, Lockheed Martin's doing it. And so the bottom line was, at first, I wasn't the head of that task force investigation because I was working Omniplan, but eventually I took over the leadership of the Lockheed Martin task force investigation. And at the end of the day, we got $7.1 million back on that.
Wow.
And then there was also another task force investigation going on at the time against a company that I will not name because they quietly settled the case out and they paid $4 million. So we had 4 task force investigations involving leaseback schemes. We took out 7 companies. We secured settlements against Boeing, United Space Alliance, and Lockheed Martin, and one unnamed Fortune 500 company.
I get like they settled so you can't discuss them or anything like that, but isn't that something?
The nature of the agreement was not mine. Department of Justice. They worked it out with Department of Justice, and they put in a confidentiality clause on it. And so I've never been able to talk about that company.
I don't want to ask questions about that specifically. I just isn't there something inherently unethical about a company that's frauding people and then they pay money and they're able to not state that they
Well,
frauded people?
I think the logic that the government's using and they're using is you might have good points. We have good points. We can fight this out in court, or we'll have a confidential agreement that we'll pay you the money that you think you're out, $4 million, and you will not disclose who we are. And that's
I guess that
basically how
makes
that.
sense. I just feel like you're at a certain point, everyone's defrauding the public.
Well, to be honest with you, I could have seen from a criminal investigator's point of view, take you in a whole different direction, but that's the way it went. So
Yeah, I don't want to get into specifics of that case because I know you can't. I just the general practice of confidentiality in cases like that I find kind of odd.
Yeah,
Like,
the crazy thing, a totally different angle, is that the companies that deal with NASA enter into confidentiality agreements with their own employees that they fire or let go, so that they can't come back and think them out. And we were dealing even with these investigations with some of those confidentiality agreements. And the argument was, hey, if they're concealing fraud, on the face of it, that's an illegal type of agreement. But that's something that you run into.
yeah, I just find that whole practice weird. But so there was a lot of different companies kind of all involved in this kind of giant, massive fraud thing. Like it just kept avalanching.
Well, look at it this way: if you're told, if you're getting paid, right? If you're told you make a left, you get $2. If you make a right, you get $10. Which way are you going to turn?
Turn right.
You're going to turn right, sure. If you do it the legitimate way, you get $2 million. If you do it the illegitimate way, you get $10 million. An unethical person, if I could say it, an unethical person is going to turn right. An ethical person is going to turn left. We had companies and individuals that were turning right, that they were doing something that was very profitable and also illegal and unethical.
And it sounds like they were getting away with it for a long time.
Well, 1981 to uh, 1993, that's a long time. And in the case of Omniplan, they were actually involved in when they were a prime contractor, NASA Computer Security at JSC. So sort of like not exactly the type of person, type of company that you want to have with such a responsible mission.
Wow, that's so this that just sounds so intense. I just can't
Yeah.
imagine going to law school all night, doing that all day, going
Well,
against all these powerful companies.
well, let me give you another story. Remember those weekends where I said I tried to spend
Yeah.
it with my kids? So I'm going to right after we execute the search warrants against Omniplan, and nearly 500 employees were fired. I'm at a baseball game with one of my sons, and all of a sudden, all these families that we've been going to baseball games all along with are talking about the fact that they just got fired, or their husband got fired, or something to that effect because of the Omniplan case. So I call up Cedric Jobert, who's the AUSA on the case. I said, we got to make this right because the employees are not crooks. Ralph Matteo is a crook, but they're not crooks. And we gotta make sure that they don't get harmed. And so we marched down to Rockwell Space Operations Company, and we got them to hire all the employees back, except for the people that
How did so they just did it because you told them to? Or-
I think we gave them. They needed those type of individuals anyhow because there was a void that was created when they were fired. And when we gave them the green light on the employees, the rank and file employees, that freed them up to make that decision to
Okay,
bring
yeah,
it
because
back.
like you said, I can't imagine most of them knew what was going on.
Yeah, but most of them did. And remember that code system that
Yeah.
Montiel had? He purposely was keeping them in the dark.
Yeah, because the more people involved in a conspiracy, the harder it is to keep quiet. So,
Well, the people we looked at were bookkeeper, the administrative assistant, the trustee, vice president, that GP Montiel, which we did go after for compassionate reasons, the son that we did go after because he had died, and And the last person was that person that I told you about that basically said, "Hey, don't look at me, guys. It's Rockwell didn't tell NASA. I told Rockwell." And so, in fact, that individual got to go forward with Rockwell after everything was said and done because, in our opinion, and in Rockwell's opinion, he did the right thing. In our opinion, Rockwell did not do the right thing, and that was the disconnect there.
Was Rockwell punished for their part and everything, or
Well, Rockwell Space Operations Company, which was a component of Rockwell, right? It dissolved, and it was their mission was absorbed by Boeing and United Space Alliance. Well, in contract language, their responsibility did not go away. It was assumed. It was assumed by Boeing and United Space Alliance, and so they did pay. They paid for what Rockwell did.
oh, okay, okay. Yeah, because I mean that guy, all he can do is report it, so he did kind of do what he was supposed to do.
Yeah, I told him I would have preferred if you went to law enforcement and told them,
It's
but
fair.
he's saying, look, I told the people that we were submitting it to, and I felt like I was doing the right thing, and I could see the argument, and he was not charged, and I think everybody could see the argument that he was making. I did not blame him. I blamed Rockwell for not doing the right thing. And I still blame Rockwell for not doing the right thing. Clearly, they were right.
That's insane. All of this came out of basically like,
Hotline
oh, let me
complaint.
use this to network.
Yeah, the funny thing is, the agents became pretty close, and we would, when we were planning out things, we would literally go to the dog tracks, and we would talk there and stuff like that. So it was a good experience that we brought all these different agencies together and got along with the FBI. And remember uh, um, the Waco disaster, right?
Yeah.
Uh, uh, trying to remember the name of the cult leader. The FBI agent actually took off for about a month to go down there, and he was flying a plane around the Waco compound. And we actually missed him. So I didn't think we were going to miss an FBI guy, but we did. He was a good guy.
Oh, that was a lot for something that was as simple as a hotline tip. Like,
The crazy thing is the amount of evidence. I had one special agent I made custodian of evidence, and she just basically her life was just making sure the evidence was reproduced for defense, categorizing the evidence, logging the evidence, and it was a lot of evidence. We basically had four different categories of evidence. We had grand jury, we had IRS, which the other agents couldn't look at. It was strictly IRS. We had evidence that we secured via subpoena ducis tecum, which is an administrative subpoena that the OIG issues. And then we had grand jury. So grand jury subpoena ducis tecum, search warrant, and IRS CID. But very, a lot of components, great people put together. But as you know, I'm a Catholic, and so first thing I did when I came down to Johnson Space Center is I looked around for a church to join the Knights of Columbus. Found a church, went in, joined the Knights of Columbus, and day one I find out that the individual that was the primary target of our investigation, Ralph Montillo, was, I believe, a fourth degree knight there. And so I turned around, quit, and I was out of there. So the bottom line is, some unethical agents might have wanted to use their faith to monitor a subject, but I wasn't going to mess around with that. know,
It's a little murky.
yeah, the church is off limits, so I didn't take advantage of that.
Yeah, it's probably for the best.
Yeah,
You got him
and
anyway, so.
I'd be answering for it to the same uh, to this day probably. But
Well,
yeah, it was a very interesting case. Do you have any questions? More
no,
questions?
I think that pretty much covers it all. Was he helpful in future cases since he ended
Yeah,
up working for you?
he was. And let me tell you one interesting story. He's working for us, and I'm working with him every day. And I said, Ralph, you're such a bright guy. You're an engineer. You're a businessman. Uh, what? I just don't understand why you had to steal the money. He said, I'm not a thief. I said, Ralph, you've been convicted of stealing a great amount of money. You're a thief. He said, no, I'm not a thief, Joseph. I'm not a thief. I said, you're not a thief? He said, no, Joseph, I'm not a thief. So what are you? Joseph, I'm an embezzler.
Way to
And he
argue
was not
semantics.
he was not a common thief. He was an embezzler. He was a higher class of thieves.
It made him feel better.
Made him feel better. It was so great that he said that when Cedric Joubert came down to the skiff, and I'm working with Ralph Matteo, and he's there. I said, I was just talking to Ralph about stealing, and I knew what he was going to do. And Ralph jumps up and he says, "Joe, I told you I'm not a thief." I said, "What?" He says, "I'm an embezzler," and he repeated it to the assistant United States attorney. I thought that was great.
That
He
is
had
pretty
already
funny.
pled guilty, so we weren't trying to get him on any new things. It was
You
just
were just busting him, yeah.
it was just the arrogance of the guy.
That's pretty funny though. Well, all right, sir. Thank you for your time. You have anything else before we go?
No, I'm not. Hope this was useful.
I really enjoyed it. That was very interesting. That was definitely a roller coaster and a little insane. I still can't believe he put his name on everything. That's the part that just confounds me. Like,
What the thing that I always felt sorry for his sister because the lady was actually a very nice lady, and she writes this really emotional, nice letter to her brother that she loves, and then she signs it first and last name. He cuts it out, and then it starts inserting it in place of his name and all these documents. He
you didn't
used his sister.
investigate her at all, or you already knew it was he was using
We
her?
no, we interviewed her, sure,
Oh,
and we knew it was fake. Yeah,
one more
one
thing.
other story I love.
Oh, go ahead. Go for your story.
It was our informant. He gives us a new tip. He says, and this is after there's an order that all of Ralph Mateo's bank accounts and property and everything else is frozen. You cannot touch them, right? And we already had a civil contempt case against him for basically taking money after the fact, and we caught him dead to rights on that. And I testified against him in court on that. The bottom line was that this this informant tells us that Ralph Matteo was using his own credit cards to fly to um, Boston and then live it up in Boston. And so, bottom line is, so thank you very much, real good. And we have these regular meetings with all the agents present. And so I had this guy come in, and he told the story about how Ralph Matteo stole the credit cards, flew to Boston, went on a whaler boat and the whole 9 yards, a sightseeing boat, the whole 9 yards. Sounded great. And the agents are kind of congratulating him. And I've got on the board a bunch of uh, pieces of cardboard. They're covering different things on the board. And I walk over to the board and I said, I pull off the first one. And what I did, and I went right down the line, he had lied to us. He stole Ralph Macchio's credit cards. He flew to Boston. He got his buddies on a bunch of people on a sightseeing boat. They went on a sightseeing boat and lived it up. And then he pretended like Ralph Macchio had stolen his own credit card. And we nailed him on that.
That
But
was
you can't,
bold of him.
huh?
That was bold of him. Like commit a
Yeah,
crime and then blame it on someone else.
yeah, he was kind of like a sleazy type A personality, and that really bothered me. But you can never fully trust an informant, and so unless they're doing it for some really noble reason, but uh, in this particular case, I'm glad we caught him before we made a big deal about it, and proved that he was. I think it took me about 48 hours to prove up the case that he lied to us and get witnesses and evidence all the way around to prove up the case.
Before we go, circling back to how he was using his sister's name on the documents. You said that he had other names for the other companies. Did you investigate those people or?
Oh yeah. Well, Nancy Montgomery and Joyce Martin were both convicted, and
Oh,
those
okay.
were the names that were on the Mercury Trust, Space Industries Leasing, and Space Industries Properties.
Okay, okay. Because I just wanted to double check on that. But I think that's everything. You have any final words before we say adieu?
No, again, uh, I love the case. I loved all my cases. Um, earlier this week, I had a murder case where I got the person 10 years deferred on a manslaughter. Last week, I grilled a police officer in the stand and got a directed verdict of not guilty on a case. And every once in a while, somebody will come up and they'll say, you're a pretty good attorney. Uh, uh, do you attribute it to your law school or whatever? And I always circle back and I say, no, I attribute it to the fact that I was a pretty good agent. And I learned the way, the old shadow thing. You know, essentially, I know what's in the heart of man. The shadow knows. Uh, I've been on the other side. I was good at being a law enforcement officer, and so now as a defense attorney, I'm able to exploit that and work it for the benefit of my clients.
Which one do you prefer, being an agent or being a lawyer, or you have no preference?
I prefer every day of the week being an agent. I never had a bad night's sleep being an agent. Every day I would do my job, and if if the defense beat me, I'd say, great, he's innocent. That's fine. When I'm a defense attorney, every single time I go to court, I'm worried that some guy is going to go to prison for 20 years, life. And the bottom line is, you don't sleep when you're representing people as a defense attorney. You have a whole bunch of bad nights. And it's because you're always worried that, hey, I get to walk out of the courtroom after everything's done, but that guy might not. Never had that worry as an agent. Never had always had a smile on my face. I loved doing what I did, and I actually had people that I arrested or charged uh, that you would think would hate me for forever. That came up to me and shook my hand and said, "You treated me fairly. You were right." And that's the way I saw my career as an agent to do what was true, do what was right, and let the fates, let the courts decide. Let if they have an argument, if a defendant has an argument or a subject has an argument, and it's right, kick them loose. And I was always happy about that. And again, one way or the other, it didn't bother me. As a defense attorney, you worry about it every single day.
It's
Every
not
time
very
I go to
stressful.
court, I'm going like, could I have done something different? Could have approached it this way or that way? And again, I do pretty darn well, but still doesn't mean that I sleep well. And that's the difference between being an agent and having a happy life, and being a defense attorney and having a stressful life.
It's noble work, though.
Yeah, well, it's double work, but let me give you it this way. When I was an agent, I was young. Now, as an attorney, I'm older. I swear to God, the fact that I'm 68 has nothing to do with it. I think I'm older because of
The
being a
stress.
defense attorney. At least that's what I'm blaming it on.
It's a good thing to blame it on. Oh, well, thank you so much for your time. I'm Jonathan,
And I'm Joe.
and all right, goodbye.
Take care, buddy.